Good afternoon, everyone. I just give a second to the gentlemen to settle there. And a warm welcome on this first Friday of the first week of the COP. Everybody probably has a few miles in them already. And thank you for coming and staying. I think this panel and all our distinguished panelists are three examples that what we are trying to do is a collaborative exercise. We just did a quick inventory. We have panelists from 3 continents on this conversation. We as 1PointFive as the project proponents are warmly welcome all of them. And we want to demonstrate that how CDR can play a very important role. So we have the technology solution provider, the off-takers, our development company. And when we started this, we also realized that to place our instruments to the market, our own sales team would not be enough. So we reached out and we tried to rely on distribution partnerships as well. And one of the very fortunate situations we were able to develop that one of the oldest carbon companies, probably hundreds of years of institutional memory, joined us as distributions, and Frederick, representing South Pole, will lead as a moderator to get into the details of it. But therefore, I'm very excited because you will see how this is all came together from all these perspectives. So Frederick, come on up. And thank you very much for everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for the introductory words. And welcome everyone to our panel on unlocking CDR, unlocking net zero, the role of CDR. And as David was explaining, we really hope that this will be a practical session giving you examples from leading companies on how CDR can be leveraged. My name is Frederick Nolan. I'm Global Director of Policy and Strategy at South Pole. South Pole is a joint venture partner of the NextGen facility. And this event is of NextGen, and I'll tell you a few more words about NextGen in a minute. But before that, I want to outline the areas that I'd like to cover with our 4 panelists here today. The first topic that I want us to dive into are the strategies that are used to implement CDR on the pathway, and giving prime examples of how you're leveraging CDR. The second topic is around ESG regulations and compliance markets and the role of CDR in those markets. And then thirdly, how the carbon market for CDR is developing, and what are the dynamics at play on that first. As I mentioned, South Pole is a joint venture partner with Mitsubishi in NextGen. And we have 5 founding buyers who are BCG, Swiss Re, UBS, LGT, and MOL. And the goal of NextGen is to develop a de-risk portfolio of durable CDR at an average price of $200 a ton to essentially provide an advanced buyer commitment in a way and signal to the market that this is an important part of the solutions and that we need to kick off the work today. And so therefore, the second objective for NextGen is really to build a trustworthy and scalable CDR market through policy advocacy, advisory, and bringing market expertise. And this is part of what we want to do today, to bring that expertise and experience to you. So I'm joined today by a panel of experts. To my left is Jamie Mulligan, Head of Carbon Utilization Science and Strategy at Amazon. Steve Kelly, President and General Manager of 1PointFive. Tatsuro Watanabe, to the far left, who is Chief Environment and Sustainability Officer at the Mitsui OSK Lines. Well, and unfortunately, Mark Kember from BCMI could not join us today, but very grateful to Kelson to be stepping in for for Mark. Kel is International Policy Director at Carbon Engineering. So let me kick it off with a first question for you, Kel. And let's start with the big picture of how corporates are using CDR in net zero. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective and your experience how CDR fits in a company's net zero journeys?
Can you guys hear me? Love that I took on the panel last minute and I get the first question. So for us, for those that aren't familiar, Carbon Engineering is the oldest direct air capture company. So we've been working on direct air capture since 2009. And we also were working to find buyers that were progressive and wanting to repurchase our technologies to be able to gain confidence in the market. So what we're seeing from corporate, we're getting interest from people who already have a very strong mission for them. Can you guys hear me? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Apologies. So I'll just backtrack. I'm Carbon Engineering. How about this? So, you know, this is the second day on this stage, and we've had mic issues, so bear with us. So I'll just mention, Helpful Symptom Carbon Engineering, we've been working on direct air capture since 2009, and we've been working with buyers that are progressive, that recognize that carbon removal solutions are needed in their net zero strategies. So some of the people that come to the table first for us are the people who already have very comprehensive emission reduction strategies, and they know that we need to invest in removals now in order to scale the market. So buyers that can recognize that removals needed to be scaled in order to have the volumes needed to meet their net zero goal, also happen to be able to not only jumpstart the market, but give confidence to the people that don't necessarily have the due diligence teams that our first buyers have been able to commit to. So it gives a really powerful market signal. And then what we hope is that we'll follow something Oxford principles to be able to continue to invest in carbon removals in a way that we move to more higher durability over time. And as the price of our technology comes down, the volumes will go up and we'll hopefully be able to scale to meet everybody's net zero goal.
Thank you, Kel. And one of those leading companies is Amazon. And I'll turn to you, Jamie. Amazon has a net zero target across all its operations by 2040, and you're already investing in CDR today. So can you tell us a little bit more about that investment and how it fits in your strategy?
Yeah, thanks. So first, to be clear, our top priority and the vast majority of our resources under the climate pledge are invested in decarbonizing our own value chain. We have a $2 billion venture capital fund for investing in new technologies to help us accelerate that decarbonization. We've been the world's largest corporate buyer of renewable energy for, I think, 4 years running. We've put more than 30 gigawatts of new renewable energy on the grid. It's larger than the grid of Belgium. We're electrifying our last mile delivery fleet. The list goes on. This is a removals panel. My role at Amazon is to think about what will be left in 2040 and to begin to scale investments in climate mitigation outside of our value chain, commensurate with that remainder. We are investing broadly across nature-based reductions and removals and technological CDR. We think that kind of portfolio is important. I'm trying to work backward from climate breakthroughs. I want to be catalytic. I want to spend real money outside of our value chain on a voluntary basis. I want to have as catalytic an impact as possible on global capacity to mitigate climate change. We have to stabilize tropical forests. If we restore those forests, we look at the IPCC pathways. There's an inflection point on global forest cover in 2030 that is harrowing. When we get to 2040, we need to shift to removals. All global emissions need to be balanced with removals. That's the definition of global net zero. Nature-based removal works, has a lot of co-benefits. There is simply not enough potential from nature-based carbon removal to address the full need in those IPCC countries. So we have to have technological solutions to augment natural ecosystem ability to take CO2 out of the air. Those technologies exist, but they're in their infancy, and we cannot wait to start scaling them up. If we're going to rely on them at the multi-gigaton scale, 2040, 2060, we have to start now, and we have a role. And this is another place where we can catalyze this transformation and breakthroughs. We can send demand signals. We can help early stage technologies get to commercial and industrial scale. We can sign bankable offtake agreements the same way that we have done with renewable energy. That's the model that we're applying. And the question is, you know, a lot of interesting new technologies out there. We want to make sure that we're supporting the ones that really have a good chance of success. There's value in letting 1,000 flowers bloom, but we also really want to really make some focused bets, some areas that we think can really contribute.
Great, thank you, Jamie, and thank you for unpacking the role of CDR on the longer term and the importance of the market signal today to make sure that we are ready for net zero in 2040. The market signal is also coming from the shipping sector with MOL, one of the rare companies to have a net zero target in the shipping sector. And so could you please explain to us indeed how does CDR fit in your strategy, and why did you decide to join NextGen as one of the vehicles?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me in as a part of this panel discussion. I'm from the CDR Buyers Fund. And MOL is an international shipping company based in Japan. We always operate more than 800 large ships, including container ship and car carrier ship and dry bulk carrier ship and crude oil tankers and LNG. So we transport or we provide ship transportation to almost all necessities of our everyday lives. Yeah, so we, MOL, is an international shipping company in one of the hardest to avail sector. However, we are so determined to be the first mover in the space of the shipping decarbonization. And more than 3 years ago, we announced to the public our ambitious target of net zero emission by 2050. So we cover all of scope 1, 2, and 3 as well. And our strategy or our plan is to reduce eliminate GHG emission from our ships. We will take 2 solutions. The first is conversion of the vessel fuel from conventional bunker fuel to the green fuel. The second is the adoption devices for more voyage efficiency, such as Wind Challenger, our own technology of modern hard telescopic automatic control of wind sail on board of the ships. However, as you may imagine, there is wide variety of size and type of ships, and a wide variety of routes and mode of cargo transportation. Then we have recognized that the 2 solutions cannot be applied for all of them. Then the third solution in the space of the CDR will be essential for us in order to realize the target of net zero by 2050. So we will rely on CDR for offsetting the remaining less than 10% of our emissions. Then your second question is why through NextGen? Because there are many jolly fellows in the team. And the second reason is I would like to stress that actually we have little knowledge about tech-based CDR immediately before joining the NextGen CDR facility. However, through NextGen, we are able to increase our knowledge by selecting projects and hearing the opinion of other buyers. To leveraging the buyer's experience in NextGen, we are planning to direct take of the CDR credit in the future, hopefully, to achieving the net zero target by 2050. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now you've heard from two off-takers of CDRs. I'd like to turn to Steve from 1PointFive. 1PointFive has sold 1.2 million tons to date. Are you seeing different types of companies entering this space? How are you seeing the market from the demand side evolve from your perspective? And what are their biggest motivations for buying?
Thank you. And perhaps just to set a bit of context, and for those that aren't aware, some of the audience were here for our presentation this morning, where we did a deep dive into the project that we are in the process of completing. So we'll be by the middle of next year, we'll be commercially operational on our first commercial scale direct air capture plant. That's going to be a 500,000 ton per year plant. So that's a scale up of, depending on where you think the starting point is, the largest DAC plant at the moment is either 4,000 or 30,000 tons, depending on which one in Iceland you're looking at. But we're scaling up to 500,000 tons, and then to get to the residual emissions expected in the aviation industry, 500 million tons. It's another 1,000-fold scale that's needed. So that's the kind of context. The first plant is on the ground. It's almost ready to start commissioning. We'll be delivering those CDRs by the middle of next year. So we've been very fortunate to be able to partner on the buying side with a number of really sort of climate leadership companies like Amazon. And I'm glad, Jamie actually did a great job of describing what the motivation is. So all I can really do is reiterate that what these businesses all have in common is that they all have robust decarbonization strategies, but have also recognized the importance of the role of removals in getting to their net zero targets. And they're not leaving it to the last mile. The removals are not considered as a last mile solution. They are something that needs to be scaled from the numbers that I've just been talking about to some really, really big volume at the end of this process. And so it's really important that buyers recognize that and play their part in helping stimulate this nascent but really, really critical industry. So leaders like Amazon, 250,000 tons they committed to, Microsoft, 500,000 tons. All Nippon Airways in Japan, which is the first airline that we've sold directly to, was 30,000 tons. Airbus was our first major commitment, was 400,000 tons. And then they've established agreements with customer airlines where they're going to be selling those credits all over, and that includes people like EasyJet, Virgin Atlantic, IAG. And then we've got other buyers in the banking industry like TD and so on. So they're all demonstrating a similar approach. They have these robust decarbonization plans to figure out how to decarbonize their own scope 1, scope 2 emissions. But they're helping us by recognizing the importance of renewables in the long term. And they'll follow this mantra that we think about: start low, go slow, and build to that ultimate objective of dealing with all of your residual emissions by the time you get to net zero.
Great. And so all of these initiatives are taking place in the voluntary market, the voluntary buyers initiatives. But we know that compliance markets are coming, and this will be a space where policy will play a very significant role, especially considering the prices that we're seeing for CDRs. So I'd like to turn to the state of the compliance market and the role of policy. And turning to you, Kelly, we often talk about the upcoming CDR market, or this CDR market, as voluntary, but also as pre-compliance. You're sending a signal about the importance of the solution to policymakers as well. And so what progress are you seeing, Kelly, on policy making globally, and what are your efforts to advocate for regulation?
So before we jump to the demand side policy, I also want to recognize that supply side policy is how we've gotten to where we are today. And so we are a Canadian-based technology company that benefited greatly from the incentive infrastructure in the Canadian federal government as well as the British Columbian government. We have these tax credits that you can use when you're doing research and development, and that allowed us to go from the university scale in 2009 to a full-term research and development facility in 2021. And then you have the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, I think somebody might know the math, but there might have been 5 direct air capture companies, and now post-IRA, there are over 100. And so that's been a very powerful signal with being able to have a $180 credit to be able to sequester underground, to be able to really spur the supply side. Now we're moving towards the plant that Stephen mentioned, where we're getting towards turning on a 0.5 megaton plant in 2025. We need to build those compliance markets much faster than I think a lot of people had realized when you start to have all of the supply come online. So I also want to recognize that there are excellent compliance markets now. One of the first was the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard in 2019. That's a great one to point to because it's also recognizing the geographic agnostic nature of removals. So the atmosphere is a shared resource. Our plants in Texas could generate compliance markets in the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. British Columbia has another great example. The low carbon fuel standard there has been in place since 2008. Recently, aviation was added at a go low, like start slow, go slow, and then the obligated aviation, which is then matching the price point of decarbonizing aviation with the cost of something like direct air capture. Last year, the price point of the BCLCFS hit $350 a ton. So you can see a scenario where you've added direct air capture to this low carbon fuel standard, you've obligated aviation at a low amount, and then as we get our technology lower, the cost of our technology lower with our innovation, we dovetail nicely into some of these markets. And the last current market that I'll mention is, again, I'm Canadian, so I'm quite biased, but the federal government in Canada is developing the first federal protocol for direct air capture, and that will be able to fit into the compliance market there. But they're also looking at other places that it could go, whether it's the clean electricity standard or something called the strategic assessment of climate change. How do you move those high quality credits into the places that we want to see them? From a future look, I'd mention a powerful signal has been government procurement. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, is looking at decarbonizing and put out an RFP for direct air capture. That's a powerful signal, again, for folks that don't have the necessarily depth to be able to do due diligence on these. If you have these international organizations, I also recognize the United States, their procurement, and the Canadian government is also looking to do a small amount of procurement. That gives the signal for buyers to be able to continue to have confidence that these technologies should be a part of the future. And then in terms of what are we looking forward and excited for, I'd have to say the 2 areas that we spend a lot of time thinking about. The UK has a really great framework and is moving very quickly in both trying to figure out how to incentivize greenhouse gas removal. They use GGRs instead of CDRs. How do you move greenhouse gas removal into the ETS? And what mechanisms are needed to close the gap on the price of the ETS relative to what is needed as the lift? And then the other one would be Japan. And Japan has a lot of really not only current framework, but also future signals about how high quality durable carbon dioxide removal can move into compliance market.
Thank you, Kelly. And as you can see, there's a wide range of policies that can support both on the supply side, great point, Kelly, as well as on the demand side to promote these solutions. And I want to zoom in now on Japan. Japan is the first country in the world to adopt CDR in its emissions trading system. So I'll turn to you again, Tatsuro, to tell us more about what is happening in Japan under the ETS.
Yeah, I'm not the super expert in answering the question. But I know I'm the only Japanese guy. They are species in battle. So I'm responsible for answering it. So let me try. Regarding Japan's ETS scheme, or GXETS. In the first phase, starting from 2023, the government aims to encourage voluntary initiatives to Japanese companies. However, in the second phase, starting from 2026, it is anticipated that the emission trading market will be in full operation with a capture emission regulations and penalty. In the first phase, from 2023 to 25 of GXETS, tech-based CDR such as DAX and also PETs are eligible under the system. It is expected that DAX and PETs will continue to be the target for the technologies in the second phase, starting from 2026 and away. However, the requirements for CDR to be targeted in the first phase of GXETS, such as involvement from the initial stage of the project and a contribution of more than 20% by GX participating companies, or the use of Japanese technology and solutions are somewhat unclear so far. In the ETS system, the accepting of CDR as eligible from the first phase is a significant step forward. It has succeeded in raising awareness of the importance of CDR both domestically and internationally, and in attracting the interest of Japanese buyers in CDR. So this has not yet fully stimulated Japanese buyers. Nevertheless, we believe that by preparing specific eligibility requirements toward 2026, the government will be able to lead to actual purchasing action.
Great to see these efforts in Japan to lead the way, indeed, and hopefully there are lots of exchanges between different national governments on how to do that. Steve, turning to you to get your view from a supplier's perspective of these policy developments. What do you make of them, and how encouraging do you see those for your technologies?
Yeah, it's really important that some of the things that we talked about, the incorporation of removals into ETS schemes and so on, is an important first step. It sends a signal. The amount of price support that's needed is the issue, and the sort of palatability of that to what is essentially generally going to be taxpayers that are going to be funding that may be a problem. But there's no question that from a sort of hygiene perspective, it demonstrates that these are acceptable, and if people are even able to allocate those removals that they've purchased against an ETS obligation, it may only be a small percentage of the cost of the CDR, but a relatively small percentage of the cost of the CDR, but it's still something that they can do. We think about as well, though, other sort of compliance situations where we think it's appropriate to incorporate CDRs, and one example of that is SAF mandates. So if you think about, aviation is a very clear example of a hard-to-abate sector, and there is a general acceptance, a growing acceptance around a number of jurisdictions in the world that SAF mandates is something that is contemplated and accepted as a decarbonization method. Now, CDR sits alongside SAF in a couple of different ways. One, it can be used to modify the carbon density of the SAF, bundling the CDR with the SAF. In fact, in the UK SAF mandate, they're already recognizing CDRs that are in value chain for the SAF to be included in the carbon intensity of the SAF. We think that it's just a small step beyond that to allow CDRs to be incorporated in. But there are a number of different ways you can bring CDR into that SAF mandate as a sub mandate, as a modifier of carbon intensity, as a substitute for buyout penalties. But the reason why, one of the reasons why two things that I want to mention there. If you look at the price point of CDRs alongside the price point of SAF, they're very comparable. There are some SAF supplies that are lower price, but a lot of SAF is more expensive. And if you look at what just like the Goldman Sachs Carbonomics estimate of average SAF pricing last year was around $750 a ton on an abatement basis. So that puts CDRs very competitive against that already. So if you think SAF is a solution, then you've got to consider that CDR is price comparable to that. And why should the SAF industry care about CDRs growing, DAC in particular growing? In order for SAF to deliver its wedge of aviation decarbonization, there's going to need to be a significant piece of that. It's going to be e-fuels. And e-fuels combine green hydrogen with atmospherically sourced CO2, and ultimately the only real viable long-term unrestricted feedstock for that is going to be DAC sourced CO2. So if you grow the DAC industry now, then you're enabling a feedstock supply at a later date for e-fuel production. So CDRs now, but at a later date, CO2 can be rerouted to fuel production and indeed other utilization technologies in usable products.
Great example of policy intervention there to CDR. Turning to the last section here on practical tips for the market. Jamie, as a buyer, how do you weigh up where it is best to deploy CDR projects? How do you assess and judge the credibility of projects? What are your main criteria?
This is a question that we continuously grapple with. We have a particular and maybe a peculiar approach to this relative to some of our peers, but so a few things. One is always thinking about value over replacement player. That's a baseball metric that probably doesn't land here. I don't know, but the point is, if we weren't doing what we were doing, what would someone in our stead be doing? And are we doing it better? Are we being more impactful than what would happen in our place? One of our peers are sort of taking a let 1,000 flowers bloom approach, diversifying, sprinkling it around, starting very early stage and upstream. That's really valuable to the market. Full stop. Very valuable. They're doing that, and so I want to create sort of differentiated value for this space. So one thing is we tend to think of ourselves a little bit downstream when these technologies move past. Some of them call themselves at commercial scale. It's really pilot and demonstration scale. When they need to get to industrial scale, and they need that long-term offtake to really get infrastructure finance in the billions of dollars, they're going to need large companies. We are confident in that. So we tend to be downstream. The 250,000 ton offtake of 1.5 is, I think, the first big example of that. The other is that we decided early on we're not going to understand and do everything well. We need to really focus and understand where we're going to make our bets and impact that we're having. Right now, we're only in direct air capture. Whole technological CDR space, only in direct air capture. We will expand. I'm interested in enhanced rock weathering. I'm interested in some forms of biomass-based carbon removal and storage. We will enter those segments when we come to understand them really well, including the quality dimension. I think there's sort of a presumption that this is much easier to monitor and verify, and that's true actually relative to nature-based solutions. But we still need to figure out how do we account for carbon associated with the energy inputs even for direct air capture. For biomass-based carbon removal and storage, where is that biomass feedstock coming from? Is it really waste? Is the counterfactual fate of that material in the embodied carbon in it really the atmosphere, or is it something else? In enhanced rock weathering, we have to model the outcomes, and so what levels of uncertainty can you accept in that kind of approach? So this is just impact evaluation. You're spending money on a thing. The purpose is to have a climate impact. You want to have confidence that you're actually having the impact that you're intended.
Great, thank you. I feel like turning to all of you to see if you have any questions for our panelists. I see one hand already, so think of your questions. We have 15-20 minutes for questions. I don't know if we have a rolling mic or maybe not. Maybe I need to do that. Does that one work? I'll just do that.
This work? This one?
Sure, yeah.
Thank
Please,
you
please,
so much. And so that I was going to make you a next page.
please introduce yourself as well.
Yes, I'm Christine Kaya. I am a member of parliament from Uganda. And I'm very pleased to be here. Why am I here? For us in Uganda and many developing countries, we are just establishing infrastructure afresh. And we want to be cognizant of carbon dioxide removals from the designs. Because for us, the rate at which we are changing infrastructure is not the level you are at. So I am here to check if I can see better benchmarking options for designs, especially in infrastructure development, to ensure that they lead us to net zero achievement in the designs. But my biggest worry is on how do we plan to incentivize? Because removing carbon dioxide calls for foregoing with profits, foregoing with some profits. And so people are like, I'm not ready to go for net zero because I'm not ready to go for removal of carbon because I'll be losing much of my profits. So how are the governments ready to incentivize investments, ready to decarbonize their investments? How have you planned for that? Because we want to learn from that and advise our governments as well how they can incentivize investors to ensure that they remove carbon amidst that threat, that fear of losing profits. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take two more questions and then we can do a round. Thank you very much. I saw two other hands. Yes, please.
Jill Story with the World Ocean Council. I'm working on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. And I know it's quite early stage, but obviously the oceans are 71% of the surface area of the planet. They store 50 times more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so the potential for ocean-based carbon dioxide removal is very significant. And I'd expect that it can probably at least get to half by 2050 of the capacity. And it's obviously very early stages in this space. There's a number of organisations I'm working with at the early stage innovators. And it would just be great to get the panel's perspective about how we can speed up the development of ocean-based carbon dioxide removal technologies.
Great. Who would like to jump in both on the question of how to incentivize removals from the perspective of the government in Africa, for example, and your question? Anyone want to jump in? Yes, Steve.
So when it comes to sharing lessons with other countries, I think we need to be able to do this for carbon removals. We already do it for so many other technologies. I used to work for the Canadian government and we had partnerships globally for information sharing and capacity building. And this industry is so new that I don't think we've started to think about that yet. So I don't have a great answer for what the future, like what we could do better. But I know that this is something that we need to think about because how do you share the lessons learned and how do you share the incentives that work? I had mentioned some from Canada, but there's different countries that have different ability to pay. And so how do you figure out new creative solutions to be able to incentivize that? I'd also just mention that, I go back to the atmosphere as a shared resource. And so we need to be deploying technology globally and where it makes the most sense. So where there's land, where there's access to clean, at least for direct air capture, access to clean electricity, access for appropriate storage. And so, thinking beyond North America, where a lot of the activity is, globally, I think is really the next thing. Sorry.
David, yeah.
One of the major challenges of incentives, Europe and many other jurisdictions always thinking about capital expenditure. But some of these projects are maybe 30% CapEx and there are 70% OpEx. What was brilliant in the US, that the US incentive structure is based on OpEx per ton. And this would be a really important thing to consider for other governments to upgrade or rethink their incentive structure. The other is for companies who are, or countries who design in compliance markets, remove geographical limitations where you're sourcing your instruments from. As today, a lot of geopolitics in it, but in the United States, you have maybe 30% of the electricity price than in Europe, war, and many other implications. So to create a ton of removals is much more affordable in North America. And if other jurisdictions start to buy, they have the technology to drop its price, and then it's going to be more deployable in other countries as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to just echo that. I mean, sort of along the lines of what I was going to say myself is that there's a lot of talk in jurisdictions in Europe, in UK, and so on, where they at the moment have a really clear focus on in-country carbon dioxide removal. The atmosphere just doesn't care where the CO2 is removed from the atmosphere. It has exactly the same impact on the climate wherever it's taken in. So low-cost locations are really important to deliver this in a cost-effective way. So, part of the answer is that those developed world jurisdictions need to be thinking about this, not just access to lower cost, but also it helps support the development of infrastructure in other countries, build that industry, create jobs in those other countries, and then that will allow them to get started on their own decarbonization journey as well.
And just to follow up very quickly, if you look at California's LCFS, that market clearly states if you have a DAC project, they would welcome it from anywhere on the planet. So they were the first to remove the geographical limitation.
Yeah, very good point, indeed. And I feel like asking a question to one of you, whoever wants to jump in around the Article 6 negotiations here. Steve, you mentioned the cooperation between countries. Maybe we'll go to Kelly, which is what Article 6 is meant to incentivize, right? So the trading of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, which could be removals. Well, how do you see that for the CDR market and perhaps the potential impact or interactions with the evolution of the voluntary market?
So I think when the Paris Agreement was written in 2015, the amount of removals that we needed to meet our targets was not in sight. So thinking about having to move megatons of CO2 removals and connect the demand and the supply market. So David mentioned it, I mentioned it, Steve mentioned it. The geographic agnosticness of Article 6, being able to build in places that it makes sense and then transfer that environmental attribute from the host country to the country. And I know Japan has been also a leader in everything when it comes to Article 6 and really wanting to bring international levels to meet the targets in Japan. That's what the North Star is. How do we mobilize that megaton volume or gigaton volume through something like Article 6? I won't speak to the negotiations because they're currently ongoing, but at some point having clear recognition of pathways. And I know I can't speak to oceans as a technology, but I know that they're trying to figure out how that works and all the complexity around the London Protocol, but getting the right blueprint within Article 6 so that other national, subnational can borrow from that so that we're not necessarily repeating the protocol developments. Being able to work towards standardization is another reason I think Article 6 is really important. And then my call to action is that host countries being able to make decisions and say, this is an activity that I want in my country, and I will authorize those credits to leave the country and become an internationally traded mitigation outcome, needs to happen. And we're not seeing that happen fast enough. So for example, in the United States, we need to move our credits from the plant in the United States to be able to move into Corsia to support our aviation partners, and potentially other countries that are looking to be able to use the removals towards their NDCs. So I'd say we're looking for a good outcome, and we're asking the articles and mechanisms to do a lot of heavy lift over the next 30 years.
Thank you. We have time for one or two last questions from the floor. Very true. A little bit, yeah. But would anyone of you want to jump in? Did you just volunteer? Indeed. Good point. Yeah, you want to?
I would say it's a promising space. It is early stages, you acknowledge. I think once we start to see some demonstrations, I think especially get more information about the ecological dynamics of these variant options. I think we're going to see it come online and sort of follow the same pathways. The regular cap is a little bit out front. Some of the biomass things are it's easier to just get online and so that they're there. But I think it's coming, and it's the same kind of validation from governments trying to put the due diligence on it, the technical validation. But I think it's set up in all the same ways as the other things to move along. And there's going to be, I think the real question is uptake in these compliance schemes. That is a key piece. Our work is voluntary here, but the theory of change is that, I don't expect that any of these things really will really scale without compliance. It's just too expensive. Amazon's a unique, not fully unique, but there's a limited number of us, right? And so we need to see, and even in our purchasing, I'm going to place bets where I expect regulators will be interested in willing and incorporating, so that's what's going to pull other buyers in, and that's what's going to really scale at the back of this thing. So you're looking for indications of that, any kind of early traction, ways to get Department of Energy or whomever to look at it, validate it, engage with it in a serious way. I think is needed in that space.
Just add one thing from our perspective. We have this great technology that carbon engineering developed. We're deploying the plant. We've got decades of experience of sequestering CO2 in underground reservoirs. The key thing that turns this into a sellable product is the MRV program. Is being assured that you have removed the CO2. We can do that by metering the CO2 as it runs through the plant. We can measure it all going in, and then we can monitor that nothing is released. So that is the key to developing or to building the value of the CDR. And ocean capture has to somehow replicate that through whatever process is going to be developed. We want all solutions to work. We need all solutions to work, so that everyone has this portfolio approach that is going to meet those Oxford offsetting principles and get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, a great point about needing all solutions, and all solutions will become cheaper at different paces depending on the innovation and the uptake from the market. So we need to explore all different ways, but clearly this is a market in its nascency, its infancy, and it's really clear that companies are not going to be able to reach net zero without CDR. So it's been quite clear from the panel here that companies are taking decarbonization within their supply chain and within their own operation very seriously, but also not leaving to the last minute the need for CDR for achieving net zero, and actually really pushing the market now to make sure that we have the solutions at an affordable price when the time comes. And I'd like to leave it. I don't think there are more questions. Okay. So before I turn to all of you, and we'll take a last other question here. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Selene and I'm a student at State. My question, I hope might be answerable, is that all of you have spoken to the fact that CDR is very much being driven by first movers and companies with robust climate commitment who are invested in figuring out their continents here. Are there any major examples of companies or stakeholders that are engaging with CDR and trying to develop CDR, who are not so necessarily committed to net zero?
Great, yeah, great question. It's very similar to the question I was going to pose to all of them. So maybe I will ask you to use that as for your concluding comments. What are other companies engaging, and what would be tips that you might have for companies that want to start engaging in this on the journey from your own experience? May I start with you?
Yeah, thank you. So, good question. Yeah, actually, we are still quite unique the company who has the interim target in figure. It is the purchasing 2.2 million CDR by 2030. So I really hope that our existence or our participation in the next gen, one of the CDR project can be a good signal for our peers in the international shipping and the other available sector, and encourage them to consider to join us, join the MOF as the anchor buyers of the CDR. But yes, we are in quite early stage, so actually we feel loneliness because we are alone in the market. It's from the hard to avail industry. So I think it's quite a good point, important point to make the CDR market in the necessary scale.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different bent on this. By just recognizing where we've come over the past 15 years as a direct air capture company. 8 years ago, before I even joined carbon engineering before me were convincing people that we weren't breaking any rules of thermodynamics, that the emissions, that we were actually creating negative emissions, and that our technologies could be deployed at commercial scale. And the first people that came and bet on our company and be able to do those pre-commitments have been our biggest allies for helping us build policy. So whether it's our aviation partners that are working to be able to understand all of the options that Steve mentioned, every time we get somebody else on that journey, it force amplifies what we can do from a policy perspective, and then hopefully brings everybody along the journey. To answer, not to answer your question, but I think one of the things that I think about is that there's been so many companies that, there's people that want to do the right thing. Then we have this green hushing about, I don't want to do anything. I'm afraid that I'm going to end up in the Guardian. So there's been a lot of flux with people want to do the right thing, and people want to have permission to be able to make sure that their decisions and the money that they're spending is going to real reductions, real removals. So I think my call would be, even if companies have had to shift their not having a net zero goal, I think being able to participate in removals and learn and then purchase should still be part of their thought process, so that we're not losing ground to this kind of mushy middle while we're waiting for things like SBTI, ICDC, MPCMI, as all of these standards come up and as claims come up. I'm hoping that other companies will continue to look at removals as a solution that's needed and invest. That's my call.
Yeah, and it's hard. I'm trying to think of anyone, but it's hard to imagine anyone engaging with this end of the credits market with high quality durable removals as a, instead of doing other stuff. Because if you just think about that, I mentioned carbonomics earlier. If you just think about that abatement curve, there's a lot of other things that people could be doing. The thing that we just encourage is, don't think about it as I said earlier, a last mile solution. The thing that really differentiates the early mover buyers is that they're recognizing that in order for there to be an industry ready to deliver those removals in 2040 or whenever, there has to be an industry being developed now. So they're ensuring that they're putting those removals in at a relatively low level now, and building up to whatever they think their residual emissions are going to be when they get to the point that they've committed to get to net zero. So yeah, I think it's hard to imagine anyone thinking this is an easy way of getting away out of their obligation. That was where I was.
I'll second that, and it's not just the cost. I mean, this stuff is relatively high on the data curve, but even nature-based stuff that's lower on the kind of global data curve. We had a lot of discussions earlier with our executives about where this fits in, prioritization, and coming into that, I thought I was going to have to like really hold the line on executives that wanted to lower costs and say, no, we have to insulate, we have to decarbonization. It was not a difficult discussion at all. What I was getting from my executives was like, buying a carbon credit does nothing to make our business more competitive in a low carbon future. It's just a cost. It's just a pure cost to the business. And so we want to minimize how much of that we have to do by the time we get to 2040. We want our business to be efficient and lean, and minimize that kind of cost burden that we have to bear relative to our competitors. And so there's a built-in people automatically assume like, oh, companies are gonna just buy their way out of the problem. And I mean, we've seen that happen with like, these carbon neutral operations plans, people buying like $2 a ton offsets, like because it's super cheap, and it's like, oh, you get a marketing gimmick. That's dead. We're past that. At least we're past that for sure. So that's the point on that front. My tip to other companies would be, you don't need anybody's permission to follow the science, and you don't need someone else's interpretation of the science. Like it's there. Just we understand the IPCC, you can pull up the IPCC report, you can read it yourself. Like you have to have the rules, right? SBTI, I used to work at WRI, I'm a big fan of SBTI. SBTI is a decarbonization target setting enterprise. That's good. It's a good thing to have. You should have that. That's part of science-based climate action. We also have to stabilize fossil performance, restore. We also have to have technological carbon removal at scale. That's what the science says. It's really clear. You don't need SBTI permission to pursue these elements of science-based science.
Great, thank you so much. And as you can see, there's a lot of momentum in this market, and we've had some really good examples of action taken today, and also of policy options that are being explored. And you can see there's a wide variety of policy options, and I really like the SAC mandate example of government procurement that go beyond the sort of carbon market solutions that we're looking at. And it's critical to have all these solutions to move this forward. So join us on this journey, and let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.